thank you all for attending tonight. Va-Dor, Touch of Torah, this January 10th, 2023. Happy New Year and a happy and a healthy one to everyone. And we are very pleased to have Rabbi Barry with us tonight. And we are beginning the new book of Exodus tonight with the first parasha, which is a jam-packed parasha, SHEMOT. And I'm going to let Rabbi take over. Go ahead, Rabbi.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for organizing this and for making it possible for people to listen in over the internet. And I thank everyone for joining us. This is a very interesting passage. It's the opening passage, as Sharon says, of Exodus, or in Hebrew, SHEMOT. And the conclusion of Genesis finishes with Joseph. And then the book of Exodus starts out with a very prophetic, profound statement. It says, a new Pharaoh arose who knew not Joseph. He knew Joseph perfectly well. He chose to forget the great contribution that Joseph had made in saving Egypt as a pretext and a pretense for being able to subject the Jewish people to torment and persecution. This has been the story of the Jewish people throughout history. The Jews have contributed greatly towards making many lands successful and prosperous and bringing righteousness to the land. And then the leaders became envious, the people became jealous, and then they turned on the Jewish people as if they knew not Joseph and forgot all the things they did and began to persecute the Jewish people. So this is a perennial tale. The story itself, we believe, is mythological. It does have a basis in history. Clearly, the Jews and the Egyptians interacted, and clearly Egyptians were more powerful, and probably there was a famine in which the Jewish people went into Egypt searching for food. However, much of the story about Moses is fanciful and mythological. However, all of it, every word of it, teaches us wonderful things about the Jewish tradition, our heritage, the beliefs of our ancestors, and a great role model of freedom and being able to stand up to authority that has guided the Jewish people for thousands of years. That is no myth. That is no fantasy. The Jewish people have been standing up to Pharaoh and leading the charge for freedom and civil rights and justice from the very, very beginning. As Sharon says, this story has many, many aspects to it. And one of them, as I mentioned, are the seeds of anti-Semitism. A new Pharaoh comes along who knows not Joseph. The other aspects of the passage that are very interesting is that there's a legend that all of the male children were to be killed according to a decree by Pharaoh, and miraculously Moses was saved. You'll see this come up again and again throughout ancient history of many different cultures. The leader, the hero, always has some type of miraculous birth. Either all the males were killed and he survived, or the parents were of a very, very old age and God worked a miracle so that people gave birth in their 90s, or some type of wondrous, magical circumstances surrounded the birth. This reached its apotheosis, literally, with the birth of Jesus for the Christians, who was a product of God and a virgin, which also is very common in mythology around the Middle East. So we have here the story that all the males were being killed, all the babies, but Moses's mother decided to hide him, kept him hidden for a few months, and then sent him on his way in a basket. The Hebrew word for basket is teva, which is also the same word as teva in Noah's Ark. So it was a means of saving the world. Noah's Ark saved all the creatures and all humanity in that ark. And the book of Exodus has a parallel in that the Jewish people were saved by that little basket in which Moses dwelt, because he eventually saved the Jewish people. According to the story, his sister went down the river with the basket to see what would happen and discovered that the daughter of Pharaoh found the basket. And then she approached her and said, "How would you like a nursemaid?" And she said, "That would be wonderful." And so Moses' sister arranged for Moses' biological mother to raise him. And at a certain age, she returned him, and Pharaoh's daughter then took him in as her own. That is what we are asked to believe as far as the origins of Moses. Then there's other fascinating stories in this passage. There's a story about the burning bush. There's a bush that's on fire, and Moses comes closer and to see this miracle, and he says, the bush burns, but it is not consumed, and I must come closer to see this miracle. This has been interpreted many ways. One way is that we could say that there's miracles going on in the world around us every day, but we don't bother to take a look. We don't come closer. We don't say, this is holy ground. Every inch of this earth is sacred, holy ground. There's miracles all over. We just need to take a look and to behold the miracles that are around us in this world of ours. Other parts of the passage also speak volumes. For me, the most important part of the passage is God's name. Moses is instructed by God to approach Pharaoh and the Jewish people and to say, let my people go. Well, Moses doesn't have any experience speaking up to Pharaoh or leading a people. And he's very nervous, like, how am I going to do that? How am I going to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go? He'll laugh at my face, or he'll kill me. So God says, don't worry, I'll be with you. I will help you. And I will convince the people that I am with you. So Moses says, how are the people going to listen to me? Says they pay no attention to me whatsoever. So he does go to Pharaoh and he says, let my people go. And instead of letting the people go, Pharaoh is incensed and he makes their life even more difficult. He says, now you have to make your own bricks because you sent this impudent person to me complaining. I'll give you something to complain about. So now the people are really mad and they're very upset with Moses for making their plight worse. And Moses goes back to God and says, how is Pharaoh going to listen to me? My own people don't even listen. And so God says, don't worry, I'll be with you. So now Moses wants some type of proof. So he says, okay, if they should ask, what is your name? What do I tell them? If I'm claiming that I'm speaking to you face to face, I better be able to at least know what your name is. So in this rare passage, God indicates what he should be called to Moses. And he says, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. This is translated in various ways, but it's pretty clear what the words mean. Ehyeh asher ehyeh means I will be what I will be. This is interpreted in different ways. One way is to interpret it by saying that the concept of God is so vast and so magnificent, so beyond anything that we can comprehend, you can't just explain the concept in a word. God is not a thing or an object. You could say that God is a process, an evolving creative process. Ehyeh asher ehyeh. I will be what I will be. In other words, this concept of the power behind the universe is evolving. It's growing with the universe. It's not static. Some people say, well, that's impossible. I thought God is eternal and he always stays the same. Well, if God does have all abilities and all potentialities, shouldn't he have the same thing that we do? We have the ability to grow and to evolve and to change. Shouldn't God? And so you could say, well, that's perfectly natural. You could also say that God is really a concept. Okay, God is a concept that we humans came up with to try to explain something. And as we learn more and more about the world around us and the universe, this concept is ever expanding. And so God himself, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, our understanding of God is constantly expanding, especially as we learn more and more about the world around us and how it works. In any event, this definition that God gives is an all-encompassing, embracing definition, which removes the straitjacket that many people find themselves are, to burst the doors wide open as far as trying to be able to understand what God's all about, what religion's all about, what Judaism's all about. It allows for an expanding concept of God that we can grow with and adapt. Fortunately, we don't have the same concept of God that they did thousands of years ago, who demanded human sacrifice, who ordered genocide, and who is executing people. It's obvious that our concept of God has been expanding. And so this name, Ehyeh Asher Yeh, makes sense. It also has in the letters, Aleph, Yud, Hey, Vav. It also has the past, Hayah, the present, Hoveh, and Yeh, the future, which means that our concept of this eternal power is a power that always has been, is present right now, and will always be. It's an eternal force, an eternal creative power in the universe. These are the highlights of the opening passages in the book of Exodus, in which God indicates that he's going to liberate the Jewish people through Moses. At this point, I will stop and ask if anybody has any questions or comments. I've shared a lot of thoughts, and if you have any thoughts or comments about God or about Moses or about the passage, feel free to share your views or ask any questions.
Anybody want to speak up? Okay, go ahead, Valerie.
Well, I said this once again, if you read a book, Chariots of the Gods and Gods of Gold, which is Eric Van Daniken, he takes excerpts of the Bible, a lot of the passages that Rabbi just quoted, and he puts a 21st century spin on it to explain exactly what it is that you're talking about and what people are actually seeing, applying 20th century technology. And if you keep an open mind and you look at those kinds of explanations, it makes a lot of sense. You know, a lot of people, they call them UFOs or whatever you want to call it, that there were more advanced civilizations that have come here. You know, a burning bush that has light and doesn't burn, or you're describing a laser light. You know, the sky rumbled and turned red and the earth shook, well, you're describing a rocket launch. You know, and you're describing a disembodied voice coming from nowhere. Well, if somebody was sitting in the middle of the room and speakers came down and you're hearing speakers coming from the ceiling, you're talking about a PA system. So if you apply Eric Van Daniken's thesis from his books to a lot of these passages, they make a lot of sense if you keep an open mind. And he's describing, because these people didn't know what they were looking at, they were just describing what they saw and what they heard and what they felt, but couldn't give you any realistic explanations of it. So, you know, it's just very interesting that these explanations and descriptions come up time and time again throughout the course of many cultures. And it just is something that fascinates me.
Yeah, well, his speculations are very interesting, and they're quite fanciful. They're about as factual as the book of Exodus itself. The book of Exodus itself is based on mythology. This is Jewish mythology. We have Greek mythology and Roman mythology and Egyptian mythology about great heroes of the past and great deeds and how the world was created. And this is part of Jewish mythology. Regarding Eric Van Daniken and his thesis that the book of Exodus or Genesis is describing aliens, I find it interesting and fun to think about, but not based on anything factual or anything that is where there's any evidence for it. If there were aliens that came down, then apparently they hid themselves, because nobody describes anybody who looks like an alien. All right, everybody appears human-like. If there was an alien who came from outer space, they would look absolutely nothing like a human being. And so if they were here, they were doing a pretty good job of hiding themselves. Also, it's hard to imagine why, if superior beings came from another planet, they would insist and committing all these horrible acts of atrocities that are attributed to God, killing people and executing people for violating rules and things like that. The more likely explanation is that in mountains, they saw sometimes there were earthquakes and sometimes there were volcanoes, and primitive people didn't understand what caused an earthquake. They didn't know about tectonics or that there was molten gas underneath the earth. So if they saw an earthquake, they would make up stories about aliens or gods making that happen. If there was a disease and they never heard of the germ theory, they would make up stories about gods spreading disease and punishing people. And the same is true with all the other natural phenomenon that they were unaware of. They would come up with explanations that seemed satisfying to them because it's better to have a wrong explanation than none at all. But they are very fancy. So it's fun to read books like Von Däniken, but I think we need to read everything. Those books, the Bible, the Constitution, the platform of our political parties. We need to read everything skeptically if we want to try to figure out the truth. Anybody else have any thoughts or comments they'd like to share?
Mr. Mabry.
Yes.
Yeah, you want
Rabbi,
Yes.
I'm trying to understand, because you know so much about the Old Testament, how to relate to all the things and the lessons that Moses went through, all the trials and tribulations, how that could relate to us in 2023. In other words, the lessons that he taught, the lessons that he went through, and all the other sacrifices, how could that be related to what's going to be happening in 2023 with us?
You know
because
what,
I see a lot of persecution of not only Jewish people, but other people that don't have the same beliefs that some people have. So could you explain some of that?
You know, you ask a very, very good question. You raise a very, very good point. The whole story of Exodus means nothing unless we can apply it to today and derive meaning from it. So I thank you very much for raising that question. And I'd be interested to hear your opinion about it as well. Let me share with you some thoughts that I have about to address your point that I learned from my father and others. So Moses was living the most comfortable life you could imagine. He's in a palace. He had every material thing he wanted. He had money and power and everything, but he was not happy. He was not content. He saw other people suffering, and therefore he suffered. He couldn't enjoy himself. And so what do we learn from this? What an incredible character, what an amazing personality the Jewish people chose to emulate. Someone who literally left his comfort zone in order to help the oppressed. We can learn so much from that, all of us. And like you say, maybe it's not just Jewish people who are suffering. There are people all across the globe who are suffering, and most of us are content to just stay in our comfort zone and ignore them. If we want to follow in the footsteps of Moses, if we want to claim to be adherents to the Jewish tradition or Jewish beliefs, we must leave our comfort zone. It doesn't mean that we have to solve all the problems of the world. The Jewish tradition tells us it is not up to us to solve all the problems, but neither shall we desist from it. And if all of us were working hard to help others, this world would be a much better place. So this is a very important lesson, to step out of our comfort zone and to be a service. another thing that we learned from this is that Moses was not perfect. Many of us feel incapable, inadequate to take on the role of trying to help other people or to make a difference in the world. Who are we? We're not perfect. We're not great spokespeople. Moses stuttered. Well, that's what Moses thought too. He said, who am I? I don't even, he says in colorful language, I'm of uncircumcised lips. In other words, he didn't speak too well. But what the Torah is trying to tell us is that you don't have to have great talents or eloquence or power. You just have to have your heart in the right place, and you have to be willing to be of service, and you can accomplish great things like Moses, and you can be a blessing. It's also telling us one other thing, that you may not succeed in bringing the people that you care about all the way to the finish line. Moses didn't get the people to the promised land, but he got them out of Egypt, and he got them to where they could see the promised land, and then others finished the job and got them delivered into the promised land. So it's not up to us to finish, but we can certainly get things started. Mabry, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Step out of our comfort zone. That's what I've got.
There you go.
And there's too many of us that's too satisfied where we're at. And we should be out of our comfort zone doing exactly what you say. Trying to make an impression, trying to do what you can do. And if it don't work, just like with Moses, we still got to continue to try.
Excellent. You phrased it very, very well, and I really appreciate that. And also, we also find that when we do that, it not only helps the other person, we feel good too. We feel better making a contribution and helping to advance humanity. It makes us feel good, and it makes the other person feel good. So thank you very much. Maybe you really brought out the essential part of the passage, which in my factual background, I had overlooked. So thank you so much for bringing out that important point.
It's almost as though we're looking in the rear view mirror to show us where we are now, because what you're describing for me is AI, artificial intelligence. It is growing, is it expanding with the human experience? And basically, that's what was. And it seems it's almost like a circle. We started here and we're going around and we're almost back to where it is that you're explaining where it started. And you're explaining AI is what you're explaining. It's growing as we grow. It's expanding as we expand. It's becoming more knowledgeable as we become more knowledgeable. It's understanding what we understand and then taking it to the next step. I mean, to me, it's fascinating.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But instead of artificial intelligence, it's natural. If you look at the universe, and it started out as a singularity, and then as expanded beings evolved that had the ability to think and to conceive, and that's the universe knowing itself. And now, like you say, Valerie, now what we're doing is we're actually figuring out how to create intelligent beings. We're actually now creating artificial intelligence that somewhat replicates what happened a long time ago and is recapitulating the past. I think you hit on something quite extraordinary that we're able to do now, but it started out as natural intelligence, and the human being is kind of trying to figure out how to create that, which is really quite fascinating. We'll be going into more detail about this on Shabbat, and it's going to be a great Torah reading where we'll have some music and some nice friendship with others, and you're welcome to join with us in person or online on Shabbat on Friday night.